That was fun. Good morning. If it's still morning. Oh, good. I just made it. So, on a sunny morning in January of 2014, I was sitting in the living room of my home in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States, while my daughter Rebecca played on the floor nearby me. And I looked over at her, and the way that the sun was falling across her reminded me, almost forcefully, of a picture I had taken of her just over 5 years before, which was this one. And so I asked if I could take her picture, and for once, she agreed. Rather than try to give me some affectionate grief, was a thing she likes to do, or throw up her hand to block the shot, she just let me take pictures of her, of which this was one. But what I didn't know, as I put away my camera, was that all of our worst fears had come true, and Rebecca's cancer had returned. Right around the time I took this picture, a tumor started to grow from the lining of one of the ventricles in her brain behind her right eye. And 149 days later, in the early evening of her 6th birthday, it killed her. And I acknowledge that is a very dark and difficult place to start a talk at a conference, but I tell you that so that you will understand the context for what I'm going to tell you next. A little more than 6 months after her funeral, on Christmas Eve day, I was wrapping up some things online ahead of the holiday, and I went onto Facebook, and when my timeline loaded up, this is what I saw. This clip art party that appeared to be celebrating the death of my little girl. This was an unavoidable call to engagement that had been inserted into my timeline. This is an ad, in effect, for a product that Facebook does annually called Year in Review. This is a feature that I had been very assiduously avoiding that year because I knew what kind of year I'd had, and I had no wish to relive it. But it's easy to imagine how this happened. Year in Review, and even that timeline ad, that call to engagement, were perfectly designed. They could not have been better done for the use case that the people at Facebook who created it had in mind. For someone who'd had a great year and was interested in sharing it, Year in Review and its ad could hardly have been any better. The problem is that somewhere in the process of building the wireframes and the visual comps and the prototypes, that vision had slowly constricted into a tunnel. They did what designers do so very well, what all of us in this room do. They focused monomaniacally on an ideal outcome and did everything they could to meet it. What they forgot was that the ideal use case is not the only use case. And this was a mistake with massive implications. If you assume that just 5% of Facebook's users in late 2014 had a bad year, that at the time was 40 million people having the same experience I did. Now, it would be 75 million people. If only 5% of Facebook's users had a bad year, that seems like a wildly optimistic estimate. Now, to their credit, Facebook did learn from this mistake. The next year's timeline ad, this call to engagement, looked like this, which was much less assumptive about what kind of year it might have been, much more neutral in its phrasing. Right? Instead of assuming that the year was necessarily something to celebrate, they just said, hey, you might want to look back. If you'd like to do that, click on through here. And what's interesting to me is that if you look at this design, in a lot of ways, I think it serves as a better call to engagement because things like see your year in review have much more prominence than in the 2014 version. Now, they applied some of these same lessons to another feature that they launched actually between that 2014 ad and this ad in, I believe, February of 2015. They launched a feature called On This Day, where they realized that sometimes if their code is going to show you a post from previous years on that same day, it might not be a happy memory. This is not one of mine, by the way. I got this from someone else. But if you look at it, the design, again, makes far fewer assumptions. Now, as I say, they did learn some lessons. I think they still have a ways to go, however. On this day, for those of you who haven't experienced it, is very much like time hop. And for those of you who haven't experienced that, it's basically something that says, hey, today is April 27th. Here are posts you made on April 27th of previous years, pictures or posts, whatever. Time hop works across all of your social media. Facebook, obviously, is very concerned just with Facebook. But one of the things that they're doing that I think is a mistake is that they consider any post in which you are tagged to be one of your memories, even if you did not yourself post it. So you can get memories of events you weren't even part of because someone tagged you, maybe because one of your kids was there and they wanted to tag you so you could see it. And then 3 years later, you get this picture again of something, hey, here's one of your memories. It's like, oh, right, I remember when Jessica tagged me. But it's kind of a risky thing to enable because not everyone tags other people for, good purposes. And then, just a few months ago, on Christmas Eve day, On This Day reminded me of a post that I had made 2 years previously. It's okay. You can sort of chuckle uncomfortably because that's what I did. And you can see from On This Day, the design elements are again, they're very neutral. But the effect can still be deeply inhuman. This is something that someone shared with me, where Year in Review had given them this picture, and then On This Day gave it to them again, of a pregnancy that had not come to term. And you'd think there was a way to turn this off, right? You'd think, oh, they've given me a feature that I didn't ask for. I can at least turn it off. Or at least filter out certain events. And in the latter sense, you would be correct. If you can find it, there are several layers of preference dialog you can dig through. And then eventually you can say, I don't want to see memories from this range of dates or from specific people. You can't block a given date for all years. You can't say, you know what, I do not ever want to see posts that were made on Valentine's Day, thank you. Right? You have to literally, if you want to block all of your Valentine's Day, you have to go to each year and say, yes, December 14th of 2011, 2012, 2013. And you can't just switch it off with a single click. But there are at least some options, which Year in Review doesn't really give you at all. And of course, in some situations, we don't have any options, right? Spammers shove stuff into our inboxes, blast sometimes painful reminders that some of us know how to overcome. This is Sarah Parmenter, a speaker and designer some of you may be familiar with, whose mother died unexpectedly a couple years ago. And so this year, she tweeted this in March, actually, saying, it's time for me to set up my Gmail filters again to filter everything directly to trash. Very few people actually have that level of knowledge. And so we keep getting these things in our inboxes, much the same way that radio and TV ads used to push them into our homes. And sometimes these intrusions get pushed into very personal channels. Somebody's bank decided to, here's your checking balance, text mom for a Mother's Day fun fact, and it's just the reply is, you don't have to do this. It's almost begging, right? Please stop. Please stop assuming that you know me. And that is a mistake we make a lot, that we assume that we know the people that we're designing for. And these features that have been designed to make tweens happier and more engaged with the devices that they already carry around every second of the day, right, can be alienating. They can go horribly wrong in other contexts. And please, let's not pretend that no tween or teen has ever had to deal with the death of a parent or sibling, because of course they have. emoji, hash flags, texts, all this stuff designed around assumptions that we've barely thought about, let alone examined closely. This is the irreducible dilemma of designing for interaction. Right? This is the undefined sea into which we cast our work and hope that it floats. The truth is, nothing is certain. There is no safe average. Everyone is an exception of some kind. Your users are both a large group of commonalities and an enormous collection of unique individual facets. And there's an irony here, I fully acknowledge. We can't pretend that the universe revolves around our design-early assumptions, but at the same time, our users tend to assume that their digital universe absolutely revolves around them because it does. And we don't get to just ignore that and throw up our hands at the unfairness of that asymmetry. That exists. We design for millions, but every one of those interactions is deeply personal. They're very close to us. And there's a tendency to sort of retreat from this and say to ourselves, we're just designing for mass communication, and everyone should understand that. We can't be expected to know everything about everyone, which is actually often untrue given how much information we collect and try to customize and personalize around. But honestly, I think the real problem here is that human psychology is not well matched to what it is we are doing. You know, Steve Jobs gave us the iPhone, and cellular networks give us the ability to suck in all of this data. And we're working in a space for which there really is no precedent. Right? These are really private and unguarded moments. Right? We check our phones when we're lying naked in bed or sitting on the toilet. Right? In moments where everything about our context says, this is my space. And then we open up this glowing portal to the entire world and have a fire hose of information blasted at us. That kind of doesn't make sense. If we were truly rational beings, which we are not, we wouldn't do that. So it's extra incumbent on those of us in this room who are designing to be extra careful in what we do and how we do it. Because when we shape information, we alter the shape of lives. In ways large or small, we alter the course of people's days, weeks, months, entire lifetimes in some cases. And this is really, really hard. It's a much harder job than I think any of us thought we were signing up for. But this is our responsibility, and it's long past time we started taking that responsibility seriously. So our industry talks a lot about empathy as a way of understanding users. This is another step beyond that. Compassion is something much deeper, as Karen McGrain said in a talk she did a few years ago. Compassion is not just being nice, okay? It's not just walking on eggshells. That's not the goal of compassion. The goal is to accept people as they come in all of their faults, all of their pain, with all of their challenges and all of their complexity, and not just feeling empathy toward them, but actually doing something with that empathy. Putting compassion into design practice means doing everything we can to anticipate the impact our work can have outside of our idealized outcomes, right? And if we're designing, even if we're designing an intranet, if we're designing something to be used inside a company, figuring out in what context that might be used. It means understanding that we can cause delight, but by the same token, we can cause pain, often with the exact same design. It means working to lessen the negative impacts that we don't even really know how to predict. I actually like this example where Juliana Hatfield got a content warning from some service or other saying that her track Impossible Song might contain or be a copy of Impossible Song by Juliana Hatfield. Right? But notice her reaction. Her reaction is not, this service sucks and I'm leaving. Her reaction is not, I am so offended. Her reaction is, God, this is dumb. And I would be willing to bet that the copy that was written by a designer, a content designer, for this email that gets sent out made that possible. Right? The copy here helps soothe the annoyance. actually treating the code output as an unpredictable third party, as Katie was putting it in her talk this morning, because sometimes the business directives have to be designed around, right? The content tracking system at whatever service this is not going away. The designers can all say, we need to get rid of this. I'm going to bet that they're not going to be able to argue the accountants out of this. But they've done their best to accommodate what might happen when that third party does something weird. Because sometimes the dumb code is just dumb, right? Code is sort of a frozen decision process that somebody put together. It models a certain set of steps. But it doesn't think, at least not yet. And sometimes, like I say, the dumb code is just dumb. As an example, and I'm going to go into a little bit of system design here. WordPress. Some of you have probably heard of it. It only runs about 27% of the entire web. And there are situations as an administrator of a WordPress site where you can get an error message. This is it. For those of you in the back who cannot read that, I'll make it a little bit clearer for you. That's the message, at least in American English. And I'm sorry, I've slightly misrepresented. That was the error message. Now, instead of having cheetna, and that's not actual American English, by the way, nobody speaks like that. Or if they do, they don't spell it that way. Anyway, used to be just a paragraph on a blank page. Literally, that was the whole page content. Now, it's in H1, and there's a short, very short, brief paragraph that tries to give you some idea of what the problem is. I'm not going to blow that up for the people in the back because it doesn't matter. The point here is that this was reported as a bug in WordPress's tracking system about 6.5 years ago. And the filed bug says, I've seen this infamous error message more times than I wanted, right? In August of 2010, when they filed this bug, it was already an infamous error message. That has spawned 7 years of discussion about what to do about this infamous bug. Some people have defended it as being like funny and fresh and we're not stuffy and corporate here. Other people propose alternate error messages for 7 years, and this bug is still open. In the process, they did move to the H1 plus the short error message. So, I mean, there was some result, but they still haven't closed it. Well, I'm sorry. It's still open. It's been closed and then reopened and closed and reopened and closed and reopened several times throughout 7 years. And I actually want to call out one passage from a related bug, because there are other bugs about this, of course, where someone said this: unjustly accused. Right? This error message actually erodes trust in the product. Right? Which, as you may recall, was one of Danielle's 3 essential pillars. Trust. Right? But someone who sees this again and again, as a WordPress administrator, loses faith, loses trust in that product. Especially if it gets triggered through no fault of their own. There was a WordPress upgrade about 3 years ago. Not even a major upgrade. It was, from 4.2.1 to 4.2.2 or something like that. And something about what they had changed in that very minor dot release suddenly triggered this error message for lots of administrators who had not changed anything except upgraded WordPress, right? Because the way plugins had been written were tripping across some API thing that was no longer valid. I don't know the actual technical details because I have to focus my attention on other things. But, right, one of the error messages in their bug tracking system about this incident basically was from someone who said, I manage 500 WordPress sites. That's actually what they said. I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but clearly they manage a lot of WordPress sites for a lot of clients, and every single one of them was giving them cheetna when they tried to do stuff for their clients. Basically, they said, that's the last WordPress upgrade I ever do. I'm finding a new CMS, one that doesn't accuse me of cheating when I'm not. All I did was upgrade for security purposes, right? Think of all the people who've had bad airline experiences and sworn off that airline for life, right? It's the same kind of thing because the trust has been eroded over time. Or, conversely, as Katie was talking about this morning with Virgin America, Virgin Atlantic, right, the trust was actually built up, in a sense. The trust that with all of those touch points and all of those experiences, by the time you get on the plane, you're still going to be like this, and you're not going to be able to open your laptop because there's just not enough room. But everything leading up to that has actually put you in a better frame of mind, right? As opposed to, let's just say, other airlines, where if you're lucky, they won't have to clean up the blood after they drag you off the plane, not to name any names, right? And so, I know people who have sworn off of United. Oh, oops. United, because of that incident, because all of their experiences with United up to that were not good enough, basically, to have some social capital to lose, right? So, as I say, this is really difficult stuff, and it's not what we're used to. Fortunately, there are resources to help you get started with it. I co-wrote a book with Sarah Wachter-Betcher, which is, I think, part of the reason I'm here today. But if books aren't your speed, that's fine. Microsoft, for example, has this whole site. They've taken actually some really impressive steps in this direction, and put it all online. And their three principles, that was weird, their three principles here are really important. Recognize exclusion, right, which means recognize where design decisions you're making might actually exclude some users. Learn from diversity, so try to look at a much broader spectrum and learn from all of those things. And then the solve for one, extend to many, which I think is really key. The point being that we're all temporarily abled, right? And if you can make a product that will work for somebody who's had an arm amputated, then you've also made a product that will work for the parent who's holding a newborn, right? So when you solve for that one sort of limited use case, you can go much further than that, right? They've discovered that putting their compassion into practice helps everyone, which maybe isn't that radical an idea once you hear it, but very few of us have ever thought about that. Making Skype more inclusive benefits everybody. Making the Xbox gaming service more accessible actually helps all users. Whether or not they need that particular feature, they still benefit from it. Right? That's the solve for one, extend to many. And to quote from them, if we use our own abilities as a baseline, we make things that are easy for some people to use but difficult for everyone else. And so they have these videos and other materials, exercise cards that you can download and use for free. I really recommend it. Because when we make those assumptions based on our own abilities, it's a mistake. But it's also entirely human. Our brains are lazy. They want to take shortcuts. They want to conserve energy, right? And our unconscious assumptions bite us in the end because the world is riotously diverse and unexpected. And so we owe it to our users and to ourselves to be cognizant of those limitations and push ourselves past those limitations as much as possible. And by doing it again and again, we build up a practice of doing that. It becomes a second way of thinking, in a sense. At first, it's difficult because we're not used to it. The same way that when you learn to drive a car or ride a bicycle, it's really difficult, and because you're constantly thinking about everything that you're doing. But then over time, it starts to become second nature because you've done it so much. Software may be eating the world. We are shaping it. What we do now, how we build, how we act, how what we build acts will profoundly influence how our societies develop over the next few generations. That sounds like a bold claim, but we've already seen examples of that in the political world just in the last few months. So those of us who build systems of interaction have a unique responsibility, because what those systems do, how they interact with us, defines them at a level far more meaningful than branding or clicks or eyeballs. The shape of a system, of any system, says something very clear about the people who created that system and what they value. To paraphrase the French gastronome Jean Brillat Savarin, tell me what you build, and I will tell you who you are. Design always has social impact, whether for good or ill. So the question is, what kind of society do we actually want to design? What do we want the future to look like? Because we are building like crazy. It's long past time we started building wisely, with a thought to how we want to affect all of our users, every one of them, and a thought to what we want the future to be. And that is what I came here to urge you, all of you, to do. It's vital that we do this, individually and as a field, where the things we're trying to do are much closer to us than they've ever been, and working in modes that really we've never experienced. We need to find our compassion, we need to engage with it more fully and more frequently, and apply it in ways that we've never thought to do. As more and more people come online, as Emma was saying, and more of our lives become represented online, the need to show kindness and understanding and respect and compassion to each other is only going to increase. The web is the most human artifact that has ever been created. So my plea and my challenge to you is to use your skills to make it more humane. Tack så mycket.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes.
How can I start to uncover my own assumptions and blind spots? What
So,
should I do?
There are a lot of things you can do. The Microsoft resources actually help a lot with that. I think the first thing is to look at what you're doing, what you're creating, and ask yourself, what am I assuming? And sometimes that can be at a very basic level. So as an example, I'm creating a remote. What am I assuming? I'm assuming that this is a product for people with hands.
Yeah.
Okay, which might seem too basic, but if you start to think through, okay, what if someone actually has, pincers because they weren't born with arms? They have some sort of prosthetic. Will the clicker still work? And if not, can I make it work in that situation? Because if so, that will probably actually be easier for people who do have hands. So to just try to think through those assumptions. And if you're working in a design team, which I know many people do, what can be useful on a given project is to designate one person whose role is to do that, is to think about the assumptions and to challenge, well, not to challenge them necessarily, but to flip them on their heads, to say, for example, with year in review, what are we assuming? Well, we're assuming that people want to share their year. What if they don't?
Right.
Like, and the answer isn't necessarily, well, let's not do this. It's, how can we make this, more accommodating to more people?
Right.
Because maybe someone who had a horrible year actually does want to relive it as a part of catharsis, but does the design and the copy actually put them off from that? Are we preventing that moment?
Right.
Right.
Have you found any of your own assumptions as you started to think about this?
I have. I guess, in a sense, the first assumption was that we don't have to think about this, right? Which is a very unconscious assumption. It's we're designing to delight, right? That's what we're here to do, is make people's lives, better and more fun. And that, again, that's what happened with Year in Review, is they were designing for delight, but they hadn't thought through that there might be many situations where delight was not really an option, and so. That sort of idea is one of my assumptions, but it's an ongoing process. I'm not going to claim I'm perfect at it. So,
if we strive to not harm anyone or offend anyone, isn't there a risk that we constrain the design space too much? Imagine trying to design a horror game that caused no distress, or a truthful news site that offended no one.
So, yeah. Yeah, you're not going to be able to avoid hurting or offending everyone. I mean, that's true.
It should be done consciously.
Well, no, you should. I mean, I don't think you should ever do it consciously. Even in a horror game, my assumption would be that you're designing to frighten, but nobody's being subjected to it against their will, right? But still, as a sort of general practice, if you've taken steps to not hurt people, then you've built up some trust, some capital, in effect, so that if you do stumble, they're much more likely to forgive, right? The same way that people might forgive a bad experience on JetBlue is a carrier in America that a lot of people really love. And I've flown them, and it's really great. If I ever, my guess is that if I have a bad experience on JetBlue, I'm going to say, well, that was a one-off.
So when they pull you off the airplane, you're going to go, it's fine.
Yeah,
I loved you before.
It depends on how bad an experience.
Okay.
Whereas with others, I know people who their luggage was delayed 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But they'd had so many bad experiences on that particular airline, they're like, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
I will never fly blah blah from now on.
And when we do mess up, because that's going to happen,
right?
What's a good way of responding to that, to your own failure?
So being completely upfront about what happened, and demonstrating that you have learned from it and want to do better, which doesn't have to be a huge thing. But Google did that with Mic Drop, which was their April Fool's joke last year, where they had to pull it down after 9 hours because there were people who said, essentially, I clicked this not understanding what would happen, and now I'm out of a job, right? Well, and they were very upfront about, we're really sorry, here's what we learned, right? And we'll do our best to not make those mistakes in the future. So.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Eric. And you'll go this way?
Thank you.